That chair belonged to my wife. Caleb Dawson's voice broke on the last word, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet crack that split the evening air like a fault line opening in dry ground. Clara Bennett stood frozen on his porch, the dinner basket still warm against her arm, staring at the empty chair she had almost sat down in without asking. She had brought meals to grieving people before. She had never had one stop her breath like this. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Wyoming Territory. Summer of 1881. Clara Bennett had been teaching school in Pine Hollow for 4 years, and in those 4 years she had learned that small towns were not made of timber and stone. They were made of stories. Who married whom? Who lost what? Who never recovered from which particular season of grief? Pine Hollow had dozens of those stories tucked behind its doors and fences, but there was one that sat heavier than the rest, the kind people lowered their voices to mention, the way you lower your voice near something still raw. The story of Caleb Dawson. Clara had heard it the week she arrived, told to her by Martha Greer at the general store, in the same matter-of-fact tone people use when they want you to understand something important without having to explain why it matters. Martha had folded a bolt of calico fabric and said without particular ceremony, "The Dawson Ranch is about 4 miles east. Good man out there. Lost his wife 2 winters ago. Don't expect him at socials. Don't expect him much of anywhere." Clara had nodded and moved on to purchasing soap. But the name stayed with her, not because she was looking for something. She wasn't. Clara Bennett at 29 had long since made her peace with the particular shape of her life, her schoolroom, her books, her Sunday visits to people who needed company. She had been engaged once briefly to a man who wanted a wife who stayed home and stopped having opinions. She had chosen her opinions. She did not regret it. What she had was purpose. What she had was a community that depended on her children who needed her, and a belief passed down from her mother like a worn quilt that when someone is hurting, you don't wait for an invitation to show up. You just show up, which was why on a Tuesday evening in late June, Clara found herself walking the road east toward the Dawson Ranch with a basket containing a covered pot of beef stew, a half loaf of bread she'd baked that morning, and a jar of apple preserves she'd been saving. She had no plan beyond the stew. She hadn't rehearsed what she would say. She simply knew that 4 years was a long time for a man to eat alone, and that sometimes the most honest thing a person could do was put food in front of someone without making a speech about it. The ranch appeared before her as the road curved, and Clara's first thought was not what she expected. She had expected neglect. She had been told the place had gone to ruin, but what she saw was something more complicated than ruin. It was a property that was alive in the ways required for survival and abandoned in the ways that required something more than survival. The fence posts were sound. The cattle looked healthy. The barn had been re-shingled at some point. The new wood stood out against the weathered gray of the old planks, raw and purposeful. But the porch was empty, and the garden along the south wall was a tangle of weeds, chest-high with the ghost of something underneath the remnant geometry of flower beds and vegetable rows, the shapes of someone's intentions swallowed by years of not being tended. Clara stopped at the gate. She told herself later that she almost turned back right then. Not from fear, Clara was not easily frightened, but from the particular sensation of stepping toward something private, something that did not belong to her. She opened the gate anyway. She crossed the yard. She knocked. Caleb Dawson opened the door on the third knock, and for a moment he simply looked at her. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, in the way of men who had built things with their hands for decades, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of creek water in late autumn. Not unfriendly, not welcoming, simply present the way a stone is present, waiting to see what you wanted without committing to any particular response before you said it. "Mr. Dawson," Clara said, "my name is Clara Bennett. I teach at the Pine Hollow School. I brought dinner." She held up the basket. He looked at the basket. He looked back at her. "I know who you are," he said. "Then you know I'm harmless," Clara said. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the ghost of the muscle memory that produced one. "Didn't say you were harmless. Said I knew who you were." Clara decided to take that as an improvement on a door shut in her face. "The stew is still hot. I thought you might not have had a proper meal today." "I ate." "What did you eat?" He paused. "Coffee." "That's not a meal, Mr. Dawson. Keeps me upright." "So does a fence post," Clara said. "And I wouldn't call that living either." He looked at her for a long moment after that. Clara held her ground, the basket steady in both hands, and did not look away. She had stood in front of 32 8-year-olds for 4 years. A taciturn cowboy was, in terms of holding a stare, considerably less challenging. Finally, Caleb Dawson stepped back from the doorway. "Come in then," he said. The inside of the house told a different story than the outside. The outside said a man is maintaining what must be maintained. The inside said a man stopped living here some time ago and has not fully decided to resume. There were signs of Eleanor Dawson everywhere, not as a shrine, not arranged deliberately, but simply present the way things are present when someone leaves and no one has had the heart to disturb them. A pair of women's work gloves on the shelf near the door. A blue ceramic mug on the windowsill that caught the last light. A small book poetry Clara could see from the spine left on the corner of the table with a piece of ribbon marking a page. The dinner table had one chair pulled up to it, just one. The second chair was pushed against the wall. Clara set the basket on the counter and began unpacking without asking permission. She had found over years of bringing meals to people in grief that the act of asking permission gave them too many opportunities to refuse. Better to simply proceed with purpose and let them absorb the fact of the meal rather than decide about it. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said from behind her. "The stew needs a bowl," Clara said reasonably. "Do you have bowls?" "Of course I have bowls." "Then point me toward them." A pause. "Cabinet left of the window." She found 2 bowls. She served the stew. She set both bowls on the table, placed the bread between them, and then turned to find him watching her with an expression that was difficult to read somewhere between wariness and something she could only describe as recognition, as though she were doing something he remembered. "Sit down, Mr. Dawson," she said. He sat. She pulled out the second chair, the one against the wall, and sat across from him. For the first 5 minutes, neither of them said much. Caleb ate, which Clara counted as a significant development, given that his apparent afternoon had consisted of coffee. She watched him without staring the way she had learned to watch children who were struggling present and attending, but not pressing. The stew was good. She knew it was good. It was her mother's recipe, and her mother had understood that food was never just food. "This is Eleanor's mug," Caleb said, suddenly nodding at the windowsill. His voice was even, informational, but his jaw had tightened slightly. "It's a beautiful color," Clara said. She had a whole collection, blues and greens mostly. He was quiet for a moment. Said she wanted the inside of the house to look like the sky and the river. Clara didn't respond immediately. She had learned that silence properly held was an invitation. And Caleb Dawson, after 3 years of no one creating space for him to speak his wife's name, without discomfort, walked into it. He talked for a long time. Not all at once, it came in fragments, the way water comes through a long frozen pipe when heat is finally applied. Bits and pieces of Eleanor Dawson assembled themselves across the dinner table in the fading evening light. Her laugh, which he said was too loud for a Sunday and perfect for every other day. The way she argued with him about the garden. She wanted flowers mixed in with the vegetables. He thought that was impractical. She planted them anyway, and he had to admit the result was better than his version. Her opinion of horses, which was that they were magnificent animals that didn't require quite as much admiring out loud as Caleb gave them. Clara laughed at that one. She couldn't help it, and Caleb for just a moment laughed too, then caught himself. The laugh faded and something closed behind his eyes quickly, like a shutter pulled, as though he'd forgotten briefly and then remembered what he was supposed to be. "I'm sorry." he said, though she couldn't tell what he was apologizing for. Don't be, Clara said. She sounds like someone worth laughing about. He looked at her across the table as though trying to locate the angle, the place where the kindness was actually pity or the warmth was actually judgment. He had apparently been searching for that angle in people for 3 years, and finding it reliably because his expression was not that of a man expecting to be surprised. But Clara meant it simply. Eleanor Dawson sounded like a real woman, vivid and particular, who had loved this man and this land and had a sense of humor about horses. That was worth something. That was worth honoring. People around here don't say her name much anymore, Caleb said finally. His voice was low. I think they figure it upsets me. Does it? Not saying it upsets me worse. Clara nodded slowly. I can understand that. Can you? My father died when I was 16, she said. My mother stopped using his name for about a year afterward. I think she thought it would hurt less. It didn't. It made him feel like he'd never existed. She paused. I told her that. She wasn't pleased with me. What happened? She started saying his name again, Clara said. And she cried every time for a while. And then she cried less. And then she told stories about him the way you've been telling stories about Eleanor tonight. Caleb was quiet. I'm not saying that's a prescription, Clara added. I'm just saying the name not being said doesn't mean the grief goes away. It just means the person gets lonelier. He set down his spoon. When he looked up at her, there was something in his face that had not been there at the door, an openness raw and careful, as though she had pressed gently against something long sealed, and felt it give slightly beneath the pressure. Nobody's talked to me like that in a long time, he said. Like what? Like I'm still here. After dinner, they sat on the porch. This was not planned, at least not by Clara. She had intended to leave after the meal, retrieve her basket, and make the walk back to town before dark. But when Caleb said simply, "It's a good evening," and remained in the doorway as though uncertain whether to go back inside or stay out, Clara set the basket down and stayed. He pulled out 2 chairs. She noticed when he did it. Noticed the slight hesitation, the way his hand rested on the second chair for just a moment before he pulled it forward. The second chair had clearly not been moved in a long time. She could see the mark on the floorboard where it normally sat, a pale rectangle against the weathered wood. Clara sat in it without comment. For a while they watched the evening come down across the fields, the light going amber and then gold, and then something softer, the cattle moving in the distance with their slow certainty, the sky beginning to show the first pale stars. And then Caleb said it, quietly, without looking at her. My wife used to sit where you're sitting. Clara didn't move. She kept her eyes on the horizon and absorbed the weight of that sentence, not just what it said, but what it cost him to say it. 3 years of not saying it. 3 years of looking at that empty chair and not filling it, not moving it, not pretending it wasn't there. She liked the evening out here, he continued. Said it was the only time of day the ranch looked like it was resting. She was right, Clara said. Yeah. His voice was soft. She usually was. Clara looked at the field stretching away in the last light, and she thought about what it meant to be the woman sitting in someone else's chair. Not taking it, not replacing it, just being present in the space where someone had once been present, filling it temporarily, the way light fills a room without claiming it. You've been sitting out here alone for 3 years, she said. It wasn't a question. Pretty much. That's a long time to watch the sunset by yourself. He didn't answer that directly, but after a moment he said, It didn't used to bother me, or I told myself it didn't. What changed? A long pause. The first stars were out fully now, and somewhere across the fields a night bird called once and went quiet. Tonight, he said. Having somebody to say it out loud to. Having somebody who... He stopped. Started again. Having somebody who doesn't look at me like I'm broken when I say her name. Clara felt something shift quietly in her chest. She didn't name it. She simply said, You're not broken, Mr. Dawson. You're just carrying something heavy. He turned to look at her, then directly for the first time since they'd come outside, and in the fading light, she could see that his eyes were wet. Not crying. Just wet the way eyes get when something long held finally comes close enough to the surface to threaten. "Caleb," he said. "My name is Caleb." "Caleb?" she said. And somehow the name said that simply in that particular moment was the end of the first wall coming down. Clara left an hour later. She walked the road back to Pine Hollow in the dark with her empty basket, and she did not let herself think too carefully about the evening, because she had learned in her years of caring for people that thinking too carefully too soon about something tender had a way of making you clumsy with it. What she allowed herself to register was this. There was a man sitting on a porch in the dark behind her, and for the first time in 3 years, he had let someone sit beside him. That was enough for tonight. Back at the Dawson Ranch, Caleb did not go inside immediately. He sat for a long time in the second chair. His chair, and the other chair. Eleanor's chair, the one that had held only air for 3 years, sat beside him, still no longer empty the same way. He sat with that. He wasn't sure what to do with it. But for the first time in a long time, the not knowing didn't feel like sinking. The following Sunday, Clara appeared at the gate again. She had told herself during the week that she would leave it alone. That she had done what she came to do, delivered a meal, sat with a lonely man, given him a brief evening of being heard. That was the work. That was what her mother had taught her. She had sat through 3 days of that conviction before admitting it wasn't quite honest. She wanted to go back, not for any complicated reason. Simply because the conversation on that porch had been the most real conversation she'd had in months, and she was a woman who needed real conversation the way some people needed sunlight. She brought bread this time, fresh baked, still warm in the towel. Caleb was in the yard when she arrived, working on a section of fence that ran along the near pasture. He heard the gate and looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "You came back. I said I might." "You didn't actually say that." "I thought it very clearly," Clara said. "I assumed you'd be able to tell." The ghost of that almost smile again. "I've got coffee on." "Then we're in business," Clara said. That was how Sunday evenings became a habit. Not announced, not negotiated, not labeled or defined. Simply she came and he was there, and gradually the discomfort of the first evening softened into something that resembled ease. Not entirely. There were still moments when Caleb went quiet in a particular way that meant he had gone somewhere Clara couldn't follow, somewhere inside the geography of what he'd lost. And those moments Clara respected by simply staying present without demanding re-entry. She brought different things each week, meals sometimes, books from the schoolhouse sometimes. Once a packet of seeds she'd received from a catalog, flower seeds that her mother had loved, and she set them on the porch railing without comment. And they sat there through most of the visit before Caleb picked them up and turned them in his hands. "What kind?" he asked. "Larkspur," Clara said. "Blue and purple. They come back every year once you get them started." He looked at the packet. Eleanor liked larkspur. "I didn't know that," Clara said. Which was true. He looked at her. "That's a coincidence." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe larkspur is just what grows well out here." He set the seeds down. He picked them up again a minute later. He kept them. The town, of course, noticed. Pine Hollow was not a large place, and the sight of Clara Bennett's figure walking the East Road on Sunday evenings was not something that passed unremarked. By the 3rd week, Martha Greer at the general store was giving Clara the kind of careful looks that meant she was selecting her words. By the 4th week, she had apparently completed her selection. "People are saying you've been going out to the Dawson place," Martha said. "I've been bringing meals," Clara said. "He's a neighbor in need." "He hasn't been at church in 3 years." "He doesn't need to be at church to deserve dinner, Martha." Martha pressed her lips together. "Some folks are wondering if it's appropriate. A young woman single going out to a widower's property alone." Clara looked at her steadily. "Some folks can wonder. I'm bringing a man a meal, not a scandal." Martha nodded slowly, with the air of someone who was not finished, but had recognized the conversation was. "He's still married to her, you know. in his heart. I know, Clara said simply. And she did know. That was never in question. But the town's attention was not the only pressure being applied. Hattie Cargill, whose husband ran the feed store, and who had an opinion about everything that moved in Pine Hollow, approached Clara after church on a Sunday in late July, with the expression of a woman bearing a correction that needed delivering. "Clara," she said, taking Clara's arm with the firmness of someone who did not intend to be brief, "I need to speak with you about Caleb Dawson." "Then speak," Clara said pleasantly. "What you're doing out there is kind. No one is disputing that, but you are 30 years old, 29. And you have your reputation to consider. People are saying—" "What are they saying, Hattie?" Hattie pulled her slightly apart from the church steps as though the information required privacy. "They're saying you've set your cap for him. That you're pursuing him, and some of the women who were close to Eleanor are not comfortable with it." Clara was quiet for a moment. "And what do you think?" she asked. "I think Eleanor Dawson was my friend," Hattie said. Her voice had dropped a register. She meant this part. "And I think she would not want him to spend the rest of his life alone out on that ranch. But I also think you need to be careful, Clara. Not for your reputation, for your heart. Because that man is not over her. He may never be over her. And a woman who walks into that situation is walking toward pain." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "I know," she said again. And she walked home carrying that knowledge like a stone in her pocket, small, smooth, and heavy, with what it meant. That evening she sat at her kitchen table for a long time before she understood what was troubling her. It wasn't what Hattie had said about reputation. Clara had very little patience for reputation as a reason to abandon kindness. It was something else, something she had not let herself look at directly until now. She was going to the ranch every Sunday because it was the right thing to do. That was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she was going back because when Caleb Dawson looked at her across that porch when he said her name or told her something about Eleanor, or laughed that brief caught laugh, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt real. She felt like herself exactly as she was enough for the space she was sitting in. And that was dangerous. Not because Caleb was dangerous, but because Clara had spent too many years making herself useful to people who needed her, and she had confused being useful with being wanted. And she did not know sitting alone at her kitchen table which one this was. The following Sunday she went anyway, because the week had not produced an answer, and going to the ranch at least gave her something real to stand in, rather than something hypothetical to worry over. Caleb was waiting on the porch when she arrived. He had fixed the porch railing. She noticed this immediately. It had been loose for weeks, the left post wobbling when she'd leaned against it. Now it was solid, braced with new wood, fitted with the precision of a man who knew how to build things correctly when he decided to build them. He watched her notice it. "Needed doing?" he said. "It looks sturdy," she said. "It is now." She thought that was all he was going to say. But as she settled into her chair, he said more quietly, "I didn't want you grabbing a railing that might give way." Clara looked at him. He was looking at the fields. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. And something in that small exchange, the railing fixed the worry behind the fixing, the not quite saying what it was about, sat between them on that porch like a third presence. Not yet named, but not gone either. Later that evening, as the dark came on and the stars showed themselves in numbers, Caleb said with no particular lead-in, "Eleanor used to say I'd work myself into the ground before I'd ask anyone for help." Was she right? Usually? A pause. "I fixed a water pump last January. Took me 3 days alone. Doc Harris said I could have asked Eddie Pierce down the road. He knows water pumps, and it would have taken an afternoon. I told Eleanor she didn't need to know everything." Clara smiled. "What did she say?" "She said, I already do." He said it with the particular warm ruefulness of someone quoting a line they've rehearsed in memory many times. She was like that, always 3 steps ahead of where I thought I was. That sounds exhausting, Clara said. Mostly it was a relief, he said quietly. Not having to explain yourself to someone. They just know. Clara felt the weight of those words without letting it show on her face. She understood what he was saying, and she understood for the first time clearly that he was not describing loss only. He was describing what he was missing. The simple animal comfort of being known. She sat with that understanding and did not speak. And the evening completed itself around them in the ordinary miracle of a night in Wyoming, the stars enormous and indifferent and somehow companionable. And when she finally walked home, she carried something different in her chest than the stone she'd walked back with the week before. She carried something lighter. She couldn't name it yet, but it felt unmistakably like beginning. The larkspur seeds stayed on the corner of the workbench in Caleb's barn for 11 days. He walked past them every morning. He did not plant them, and he did not move them, and he did not throw them away. He simply walked past them the way you walk past something you're not ready to make a decision about, which is itself a kind of decision, though one a man can pretend isn't happening. On the 12th day, he planted them. He didn't tell Clara the following Sunday. But when she arrived and he met her at the gate, there was something slightly different in the set of his shoulders, less braced somehow, less prepared for the effort of enduring company. She noticed it and said nothing, and they walked to the porch together, in the easy quiet that had become, without anyone announcing it, the signature of their Sunday evenings. It was Clara who finally noticed the turned earth along the south wall. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at it for a long moment, registering the fresh soil, the small, precise rows, the care in the spacing. "Larkspur?" she asked. "Take a few weeks to come up," he said. He was looking at the fields, not at her. "Figured the south wall gets enough light." "It does," she said. A pause. "Eleanor's section is still there underneath," he said. "I didn't dig into it, just worked around the edges." Clara heard what was underneath that sentence, the care of it, the precision of loving something, without erasing what came before. "That's exactly right," she said quietly. He glanced at her then, quick assessing. The way a man looks at someone when he's checking whether they meant something or were simply being polite. She met his eyes. He looked away first, but the set of his shoulders had shifted again, and this time it was unmistakable. Something in him was putting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his own body. The Sundays accumulated into August. With them came small changes that Clara catalogued without meaning to, the way you catalog things you're paying attention to without admitting you're paying attention. The dinner table had both chairs pulled up to it now, not pushed against the wall. Both chairs facing each other as though the table had been waiting for this arrangement the whole time. The blue ceramic mug Eleanor had kept on the windowsill had been moved, not removed, but repositioned to a shelf where it sat among other things, rather than alone in its particular significance. One evening she arrived to find Caleb on the porch with a book open in his lap. Not one of the books she'd brought, but his own. Something he'd clearly dug out from somewhere, and he was actually reading it, not just holding it. These were not dramatic transformations. They were the quiet evidence of a man beginning to re-inhabit his own life. Clara understood the difference between healing and replacing. She had watched her mother navigate that difference after her father died, the careful work of letting grief shift from the foreground to the background without pretending it had disappeared. What she was watching in Caleb Dawson was that same slow geography, the grief not leaving, but making room. She told herself this was sufficient. She was not certain she believed it. The morning the problem started was a Monday in late August. Clara was at the schoolhouse setting up for the fall term that would begin in 2 weeks when Reverend Pierce's wife Edna stopped in under the pretense of dropping off a donated reader. Edna Pierce was not a malicious woman, but she was thorough, and she had the pastor's wife's particular gift of delivering information as concern. "I wanted you to hear it from a friend before you heard it elsewhere." Edna said, setting the reader on Clara's desk with the gravity of someone delivering evidence. People have been talking about your visits to the Dawson Ranch. More specifically, she paused as though arranging the words into their most tactful configuration. There are women in this congregation, women who knew Eleanor personally, who feel that 3 months of weekly visits constitute something more than Christian charity. Clara kept her hands flat on the desk. And what do they feel it constitutes? Pursuit, Edna said gently, of a man who is still not clear-headed with grief. Caleb Dawson is one of the clearest-headed men I have ever met, Clara said. Clara? He lost his wife. He is not impaired. He is sad. There is a difference, Edna. Edna sat down in one of the student chairs with the air of someone settling in for a longer conversation than Clara wanted to have. I am not questioning his capacity. I am asking you to consider how this looks. You are a single woman. He is a widower. You visit alone in the evening regularly. That is the shape of a courtship, whether you name it that or not. Clara was quiet for a moment. The problem was that Edna was not wrong about the shape. I am not pursuing Caleb Dawson, Clara said. And then, because she believed in telling the truth even when it was complicated, she added, I am his friend, and if something else develops from that, I will not pretend it was an accident. But what is happening right now is friendship, and he needs it. What if you need more? Edna asked softly. The question landed with the precision of something aimed. Clara did not answer it. Because she didn't have an answer, she was ready to say out loud. Dink. That Sunday, she almost didn't go. She stood at the crossroads where the East Road branched off toward the Dawson Ranch and held the familiar argument with herself. The argument about what she wanted versus what was appropriate, versus what was honest, versus what Caleb had actually asked for, which was nothing, nothing at all. He had never asked for anything except the quiet company of Sunday evenings. She went. She went because not going would have required choosing to deny him something that was costing her very little and meaning to him what she could see it meant every time she came through that gate, and the tension around his eyes eased fractionally as though her presence was something he'd been braced against losing. She could not choose not to give that. It wasn't in her. What she could do was be more careful about herself, about what she was naming inside her own chest. Caleb met her at the gate. This was new. He had never met her at the gate before. She had always walked up to the house. But there he was, and for a split second, she wondered if something had gone wrong, if he was going to tell her the visits needed to stop, if the town's pressure had reached him through some channel she wasn't aware of. There's something I want to show you, he said instead. No preamble, no explanation. He led her to the south wall. The larkspur had come up. Clara stopped. They stood together in front of the new growth, thin green shoots, barely an inch high but unmistakably alive, unmistakably intentional, pushing up out of the dark soil with the stubborn certainty of things that know what they are. They came up all at once, Caleb said. 3 days ago. I came out in the morning, and they were just... He paused. There. Clara couldn't speak for a moment. Not because she was overcome, she was not a woman given to being overcome, but because she understood what she was looking at, and it required a moment to absorb. He had planted something. After 3 years of letting things go untended, he had put something in the ground and waited for it, and cared whether it came up. They're going to be beautiful, she said. Her voice was steady. Yeah, he said. He was looking at them with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not peace exactly. Something more complicated than peace. Something that held both loss and forward motion in the same frame, the way a scar holds both wound and healing in the same tissue. Eleanor would have said they needed more water, he said. Would she have been right? The corner of his mouth moved. Probably. Clara smiled. He looked at her, and for just a moment, just a breath's worth, neither of them looked away. Inside over coffee, that had actually been made with care, rather than endured as a necessity. Caleb told her about a conversation he'd had that week with his neighbor Eddie Pierce, who'd come by about a fence dispute, and stayed for an hour and a half, and how that had not been an unpleasant thing. "Eddie's all right," Caleb said. "I'd forgotten." "Forgotten what?" "That he's all right. I stopped noticing people for a while. Stopped letting them notice me." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Easier that way." "Was it?" Clara asked. She kept her voice neutral. "No," he said flatly. "But it felt like it should be." Clara nodded. "People don't know what to do with grief," she said. "So they either avoid the grieving person or they say the wrong thing. And the grieving person learns to make themselves smaller, so it's less uncomfortable for everyone." He looked at her sharply. "That's exactly it." "It's what my mother did," Clara said, "and what I watched her undo slowly when she decided she was allowed to take up space again." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Is that what I'm doing?" he asked. "Taking up space again." "Yes," Clara said, simply, directly. He absorbed that. "It feels strange," he admitted. "Like putting on a coat you haven't worn in years and finding out it still fits." "Does it fit?" He looked at her across the table. "Better than I expected," he said. The next complication arrived, as complications often do, wearing the face of someone who believed they were helping. Thomas Grady was the largest landowner in the county, a man who had accumulated acreage the way other men accumulated opinions, with relentless attention and no particular scruple about method. He was not cruel exactly. He was transactional. He understood everything in terms of leverage, and he had identified 2 years ago that the Dawson Ranch, well-watered, positioned at the junction of two good grazing routes with a creek that ran year-round, was exactly the kind of property that, if absorbed into his holdings, would make him considerably more powerful. He had made Caleb an offer once before, 8 months after Eleanor died. Caleb had told him with a brevity that left no room for negotiation where he could put the offer. But Thomas Grady was patient, and he had been watching the Dawson Ranch the way a man watches a fence he expects to eventually fall. He came on a Wednesday unannounced, when Clara was not there. Caleb was in the barn when he rode up, heard the horse came out, and found Grady dismounting, with the practiced ease of a man who made himself at home everywhere he went. "Dawson," Grady said, extending his hand. "Been a while?" "Not long enough," Caleb said. He shook the hand, because you shook hands. He let go of it as fast as courtesy allowed. Grady smiled the smile of a man who expected to encounter resistance and had already calculated the path around it. "I'm going to be direct with you. I know you've been having a difficult time. I know this place has gotten hard to manage alone. I manage fine. The South Field's been fallow for 2 years. The South Field is being rested," Caleb said. "That's how land works." "I'm prepared to offer you $15,000, Grady said. "Cash. You could start fresh somewhere. No memories in every corner. Must be hard, a man alone in a house full of—" "Get off my land," Caleb said. His voice was quiet. That kind of quiet. Grady blinked. "Caleb?" "I said get off my land, Thomas. I won't say it a third time." Grady looked at him for a long moment, assessing, recalibrating, and then the smile came back smaller. This time the smile of a man filing information away. "Think about it," he said pleasantly, remounting. "Offer stands." He rode out. Caleb stood in the yard for a long time after the sound of hooves faded, and what he felt was something he hadn't expected to feel. Not just anger. Anger was familiar. Anger was simple. What he felt was protective, not of himself. He had never been much afraid of things on his own behalf. But of this place, of the south wall with its larkspur shoots, of the 2 chairs on the porch, of the particular shape that Sunday evenings had taken on, which had quietly become the thing he measured the week by. The ranch, in the months since Clara had started coming, had become a home again. Not the same home, different, carrying different things, but home. And he was not going to let Thomas Grady make it into a number on a bank draft. He told Clara about it the following Sunday. Not immediately. They'd been talking for an hour about other things, school board business, and a letter she'd received from her sister in Ohio, and whether the barn needed a new weather vane, which Caleb thought was unnecessary, and Clara thought was purely on principle a good idea. Then he said, Grady came by. Clara went still. Clara went. She knew the name. Everyone in Pine Hollow knew the name. And she could read in the way Caleb said it the particular flatness that it hadn't been a friendly visit. What did he want? The ranch. Same as before. What did you say? Same as before. Clara looked at him carefully. Are you all right? I'm fine, he said. Then, with the honesty she'd come to expect from him when she pressed, I was angry, and then I don't know, glad that I was angry, that I cared enough about this place to be angry. You didn't before. He shook his head slowly. 6 months ago, if Grady had come by with that offer, I think I might have taken it. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't have enough left in me to fight. Clara felt the weight of that sink through her. And now? She asked. He looked at her directly. Now I have reasons to stay, he said. It was said plainly, with no performance in it, the way Caleb Dawson said anything that mattered, stripped of ornament, carrying all its weight in the simplest possible arrangement of words. Clara looked back at him. She did not look away, and the silence between them, which had always been a comfortable thing, shifted, became charged with something that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but simply present and undeniable. The way the sky before a storm is neither good nor bad, but simply cannot be ignored. Good, she said finally. Her voice was even, but her hands in her lap had pressed together without her telling them to. That night, she walked home faster than usual, not from fear, from the feeling of something arriving at a speed she wasn't sure she was prepared for. Clara was a deliberate woman. She thought things through. She measured outcomes. She did not allow herself to be carried by currents she hadn't mapped first. But something was happening that she hadn't fully mapped. And the terrifying part, the part that kept her walking fast through the dark, was that she wasn't sure she wanted to map it. She just wanted it to keep happening. Wrong. The thing she hadn't accounted for was Hattie Cargill's husband. Frank Cargill ran the feed store, knew everything, and had recently begun sharing that knowledge with anyone who stood still long enough to hear it. What he had decided to share specifically was that Clara Bennett was making a fool of herself over Caleb Dawson, and that Caleb Dawson was taking advantage of a good woman's charity while still being in love with his dead wife. Clara heard this from 3 different people in 4 days. She did not respond to any of them. But the 3rd time from a woman named Ruth Alcott, who delivered the information with a particularly pointed sympathy, Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hurt exactly. Something sharper. Because underneath what Frank Cargill was saying, underneath the social judgment and the small-town narrative, there was a question that was actually worth asking. Was Caleb taking advantage of her? Not deliberately, not maliciously. But was she spending her Sundays and her bread and her larkspur seeds on a man who needed what she gave him and would never be able to give anything back? She thought about the railing he'd fixed. She thought about the gate he now met her at. She thought about the way he'd said, "Now I have reasons to stay." She thought about how he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, with the precise expression of a man noticing something he hadn't planned to notice. No. That was not a man taking advantage. That was a man who was terrified of what he was starting to feel, which was, she realized, an entirely different problem. The Sunday that things finally broke open was in the 2nd week of September. It didn't begin as an unusual evening. Clara arrived. Caleb made coffee. They sat on the porch as the afternoon slid toward evening. But there was something different in the air. A tension that had been building for weeks, the way pressure builds in a closed room. Caleb was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was settled. This was something that hadn't settled. He was watching the fields with the expression of a man working through something that wouldn't come out right no matter how he arranged it. Clara waited. She was good at waiting. He let 15 minutes pass before he said it. "People have been talking to you about me," he said. Not a question. Clara kept her voice neutral. "People talk about everything in Pine Hollow. That's not specific to you." "Don't do that," he said. She looked at him. "Don't smooth it over," he said. "I know they've been saying things. Eddie Pierce told me. Frank Cargill's been running his mouth at the feed store." He paused. "I know what they're saying about you." Clara was quiet. "Are they right?" he asked. His voice was direct. He was looking at the fields, not at her. "About what specifically?" "That you're wasting your time out here. That you're giving and giving and there's nothing coming back." "Caleb?" "I need you to answer the question," he said. "Straight. Because I've been sitting with it for a week, and I can't find the right answer from where I'm standing." Clara turned to face him fully. "No," she said. "They're not right." "How are they not right?" He turned to look at her now, and what was in his face was not anger, but something more exposed than anger, the expression of a man forcing himself to look at something he'd rather not look at. "You come out here every Sunday. You bring food and books and flower seeds, and you sit with a man who—" He stopped. "Who is bad at this, at saying things, at being available." "You're not bad at it," Clara said. "You're careful. There's a difference." "Clara." He said her name like a door he was deciding whether to open. "I am carrying something that isn't yours to carry. You know that." "I know it," she said. "I've never asked to carry it. I've just sat near it." "Why?" The word came out stripped raw short, genuinely confused. Not rhetorical. He actually didn't know why she kept coming back, and the not knowing was something he'd stopped being able to contain. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because when I sit here, I feel like myself. And that's not something I've had in a long time, Caleb. That's not a small thing." He stared at her. She held his gaze and did not soften it or dress it up. She had said the true thing. It was out now, and she had no interest in taking it back. "You feel like yourself," he repeated slowly. "Yes. Not like you're being useful, or you're doing the right thing. I'm both of those things too," she said. "But that's not why I keep coming back." The silence after that was different from every silence they'd sat in before. It had weight and heat and direction, the kind of silence that contains a sentence neither person is quite ready to say out loud yet. Caleb looked back at the fields, but something in his posture had changed entirely. He was no longer braced against her. He was simply there. "I planted more seeds," he said after a long moment. Clara blinked. "What?" "In the garden. Not larkspur, yarrow, and some sweet pea along the fence line. Eleanor never planted sweet pea." He paused. "I thought that was—" He stopped. Started again. "I thought it might be all right. To add something new." Clara felt something warm and aching move through her chest. "It's more than all right," she said quietly. "I'm not ready," he said. His voice had gone careful again, not closed, but careful. "For whatever this is, I'm not going to pretend I am." "I'm not asking you to be ready," Clara said. "But you deserve someone who is." "I deserve someone who's honest," she said. "You're the most honest man I've met in 4 years. I can work with not ready." He looked at her. For the first time, what she saw in his face was not grief and not wariness, and not the complex self-armor of a man determined to protect everyone, including himself, from what he felt. It was something simpler. Gratitude. Real gratitude, the kind that has nothing theatrical about it, that lives in the jaw and the eyes and the set of the shoulders, the body's language for something the mouth doesn't quite have words for. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "I'm glad you knocked on my door." She smiled. It was not a small smile. It was the full, unguarded kind, the kind she didn't give easily. "So am I," she said. Min. She left an hour later. She walked home in the dark, and this time she did not walk fast. She walked at the pace of someone who has arrived somewhere they didn't expect to be, and who is taking a moment to understand the shape of the place. Behind her, Caleb Dawson sat on the porch in the dark. Both chairs occupied. One by him. One by her absence, which was not nothing, was in fact very specifically someone real and particular, and entirely unlike the ghost that had sat in that chair for 3 years. He sat with that difference. He sat with the sweet pea seeds still in his hands, which he'd picked up before she left and forgotten to put down. After a long time he stood. He went inside. He did not go to the shelf where Eleanor's book sat. He went to his desk, and he got out a piece of paper, and he wrote a single line. Then looked at it for a while, then folded it and set it in his front pocket. He wasn't sure what he'd do with it yet, but he'd written it. And that was further than he'd been. The piece of paper sat in Caleb's front pocket for 4 days. He didn't read it again. He knew what it said. He'd written it in one motion, the way you write something you've been thinking without knowing you were thinking it, and then the writing of it had scared him badly enough that he'd folded it immediately so he wouldn't have to look at what he'd done. He wore the same jacket 3 days running, which he never did because changing jackets meant moving the paper, and moving the paper meant deciding something. On the 4th day, he took it out. He unfolded it. He read it. It said, "I think I am starting to love her." He folded it again. He put it in the wood stove. He watched it burn. And then he stood in his kitchen with the particular sick feeling of a man who has just destroyed evidence of something that is still entirely true. Say, the problem with burning the paper was that it changed nothing. He still felt it on Sunday, when Clara came through the gate and walked toward the house with the particular directness she brought to everything. No hesitation, no performance. Just Clara, moving through the world at her own speed, carrying bread or books or nothing at all. It didn't matter. He felt it when she laughed at something he said. Her laugh was not small or polite. It was the laugh of a woman who found things genuinely funny and had no interest in pretending otherwise. He felt it in the silence between them, which had always been easy, and was now something more than easy. It was necessary. It was the kind of silence you build a life in. He felt it, and it frightened him, and he did what a man does with things that frighten him when he has learned to manage alone. He kept it to himself, and became slightly more difficult to reach. Clara noticed within 2 visits. She didn't say anything immediately. She was not a woman who rushed at things, but she noticed the new distance the way you notice a change in weather before the weather arrives. Something in Caleb had gone careful again, but it wasn't the same careful as before. Before he'd been careful because he was closed. Now he was careful in the way of someone who knows exactly what they're protecting and why. She let it sit for 1 Sunday. On the 2nd Sunday, she arrived to find him doing unnecessary work. He had repaired a section of fence that did not need repairing, replaced boards in the barn floor that were perfectly serviceable, and was currently engaged in resetting a fence post that she was fairly certain he had set himself 2 weeks ago. She stood at the fence and watched him for a moment. "That post looks exactly right to me," she said. "It was leaning," he said without looking up. "It was plumb last time I was here." Ground shifts. "Caleb." He stopped. He straightened. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been caught and knows it, and is deciding how to handle the situation. "Come have coffee," she said. "I've got work to do." "The post is fine. Come have coffee." A long pause. He came. They sat at the kitchen table, and for a few minutes the conversation stayed on safe ground. The school term, the new family that had moved in 2 miles from town, whether the weather was going to turn early this year. Normal things. The kind of normal things that are useful precisely because they occupy the mouth while the mind works out what it actually wants to say. Then Clara set down her cup. "You're pulling back," she said, not accusing, stating. The way you state a fact that needs to be in the room before anything else can happen. Caleb wrapped both hands around his mug. He didn't deny it. That was one of the things about him that Clara had come to value absolutely. He didn't perform. He might stay quiet, He might take time, but he didn't pretend. "I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" A long pause. "About what I'm doing," he said. "What this is. What it—" He stopped. The jaw tightened. "What it means." "And what have you decided?" "I haven't decided anything. That's the problem." Clara looked at him steadily. "What's the question?" He looked up then, directly at her. And what was in his face was so undefended that she felt it like a hand on her sternum, the full exposed weight of a man who could not make himself smaller than he was anymore. "If I let myself feel what I'm feeling," he said carefully, "what does that make Eleanor?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. Clara did not rush to answer it. She understood it was not a simple question, and that a simple answer would be an insult to everything that had brought him to the point of asking. "It makes her someone you loved completely," Clara said. "It doesn't change that. People will say I moved on. Let them say it. It's not that easy." "No," she said, "it isn't. But Caleb, who in this room do you owe an explanation to Eleanor, is gone. She is not asking you to explain yourself. I know that. Then who are you explaining yourself to?" He didn't answer, because the answer was himself. He was the one demanding the explanation. He was the one prosecuting the case, and sitting as judge, and delivering the verdict, and serving out the sentence. 3 years of it. Clara didn't say that out loud. She didn't need to. She watched him work it through in real time, the thing happening behind his eyes. The slow recognition, the way a man looks when he finally identifies the trap he's been sitting in and realizes he built it himself. "I don't know how to stop feeling like I'm betraying her," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I know it doesn't make sense. I know she's gone. But it still feels like if I turn towards something new, I am turning away from her. And I cannot make that feel acceptable. I have tried." "I know," Clara said. "You can't fix that," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "I know that too," she said. A pause. "Then why are you still here?" he asked. "Because I'm not here to fix it," Clara said. "I'm here because you're worth sitting with even when you're stuck. That's a different thing." He looked at her for a long time. "Clara." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide anything. I'm telling you I'm not leaving because you're struggling. That's not the kind of person I am." Something moved across his face. The particular expression of a man who has been waiting without knowing. He was waiting to hear that exact sentence. "And to you." But the following week delivered the thing that pulled the ground out from under both of them. Caleb was in the house going through the shelf in the back room, where Eleanor had kept books and letters, and the accumulated paperwork of a life looking for a land deed he needed for a boundary dispute with a neighboring property. He hadn't been in that shelf in 3 years. He'd worked around it in the way you work around something you're not ready to touch. He found the deed, and behind the deed in an envelope he did not recognize was a letter. Eleanor's handwriting. He knew her handwriting the way he knew the shape of his own hands completely without having to look twice. His name was on the envelope. Not Mrs. Eleanor Dawson, not a return address. Just Caleb, in her hand. He sat down on the floor of the back room without entirely meaning to. He turned the envelope over. It had never been sealed. The flap was just tucked in, the way you tuck something you intend to give in person and never got the chance. He pulled out the letter. His hands were not entirely steady. Eleanor had written it in the weeks before she died. He knew this from the date at the top, which put it in early November of the year. She passed 3 weeks before the illness took her fast and without much warning, which meant she had written it, knowing something he hadn't known then, that she was scared. That she had sensed perhaps the way the body sometimes senses its own trajectory before the mind is ready to follow. She had written, "Caleb, I have started this letter 4 times and thrown it away 4 times because I cannot find the words that are right for what I want to say. So I'm going to stop looking for the right words and just say the true ones. You are the best man I have ever known. Not because you never make mistakes or because you are easy. God knows you are not easy, but because everything you do with your whole self. You loved me with your whole self. That is not a small thing. That is actually everything. I need to say something that you are going to argue with. So I am saying it in a letter where you cannot interrupt. If someday your heart finds kindness again, do not punish yourself for living. I mean this. I am not being noble or selfless. I am being honest. A man like you is not built to be alone. And whoever she is, if there is a she is not taking anything from me. What you gave me is mine. It always will be. She just gets what comes after. Don't you dare be alone for 3 years being stubborn about this. I love you. I will love you from wherever I end up. But I am releasing you. Right now. In this letter. You are released. Your Eleanor. He sat on the floor of that back room for a long time. He did not cry. He had done his crying, 3 years of it at odd hours, usually in the barn, where no one could see him. The kind of crying that is not grief so much as the body's way of processing something too large for the mind to hold. He had already done that work in the dark alone. What he felt now was different. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten had a key. It was the feeling of permission arriving 3 years late from the only person whose permission had ever actually mattered to him. He read the letter twice. The second time he stopped at, "Don't you dare be alone for 3 years being stubborn about this." He laughed. A real laugh, short and voluntary, the kind that surprises you on its way out. Because that was Eleanor. That was entirely Eleanor, the joke inside the love, the nudge inside the grace. The woman who had been 3 steps ahead of him, their entire marriage, and had apparently managed it from beyond the grave as well. He sat with the letter until the light changed. Then he stood up. He folded Eleanor's letter with great care and put it back in its envelope, and put the envelope in the inside pocket of his good jacket, the jacket he wore to town, the jacket he wore when something mattered, and then he went to find Clara. He did not find Clara at the ranch because it was not Sunday. It was a Thursday. He had never gone to town specifically to find her on a weekday. That was a line he had not crossed. Sunday was Sunday, the ranch was the ranch, and the rest of the week was the boundary that told him he was still in control of what was happening. He crossed it. He rode to Pine Hollow and went directly to the schoolhouse where school was in session, which he had not thought through. He stood outside the door for a full 2 minutes, listening to Clara's voice through the wood. She was teaching mathematics fractions with the particular mix of patience and clear expectations that he had come to understand was her essential nature before he accepted that he was going to have to wait. He waited at the gate of the schoolyard for 45 minutes. When the school day ended and the children came out, 3 of them stopped to look at him with the frank curiosity of children who have not yet learned to pretend they aren't looking. One of them, a boy of about 10 with red hair, said, "Are you the cowboy from the Dawson Ranch?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Miss Bennett talks about you," the boy said. Caleb looked at him. "Does she?" "She doesn't say she does," the boy said thoughtfully. "But you can tell when a person is not talking about someone on purpose." Caleb stared at the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old walked away with the serenity of someone who has delivered his information and considers the matter complete. Clara appeared in the schoolhouse doorway a few minutes later, coat on, carrying books, and stopped dead when she saw him at the gate. She recovered in about 2 seconds. That was Clara. She might be surprised, but she didn't stay surprised. "Caleb," she said. Not a question. Just his name with a slight rise at the end that made room for whatever he'd come to say. "I need to talk to you," he said. "All right." She came to the gate and through it, and they stood together on the road outside the school, with the afternoon sun going long and amber, and she looked at him with the steady attention she gave to everything that mattered. "I found a letter," he said. "From Eleanor, in the back room. She wrote it before she died." Clara went very still. He stopped. He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. He held it for a moment, not giving it to her yet. "She knew that I would do this, get stuck. She wrote, she said—" He stopped again because the words were harder out loud than they'd been on the page. "She released me. Those are her words. She said she was releasing me." Clara's expression was not what he expected. He had expected relief, or warmth, or the satisfied look of someone who has been right about something. Instead, what was in her face was something more complicated and more honest, the expression of a person receiving something significant and feeling the full weight of it. "Oh, Caleb," she said softly. "She knew I'd be stubborn about it," he said. She said, the laugh came again, that involuntary one. "She told me not to dare be alone for 3 years being stubborn about it." Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else. "Was she right?" Clara asked. "She was always right." "Yes." Clara looked at him. "What did you feel when you read it?" He thought about the floor of the back room, the changed light, the key in the lock. "Like I'd been given permission to breathe," he said. Clara nodded slowly. "And are you breathing?" "Working on it," he said. She smiled. He didn't smile back. Immediately, he was looking at her with the full, direct attention of a man who has made a decision and is not going to dress it up or walk it back. His jaw was set, his eyes were clear. He was the most present she had ever seen him. "I wanted you to know," he said. "Before I said anything else, I wanted you to know it wasn't just me wanting something I wasn't sure I was allowed to want. She knew. She planned for it, which is, that's Eleanor. That's exactly Eleanor." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "What else did you want to say?" she asked quietly. He took a breath. He stopped. He looked at the road, then back at her. "I'm not good at this part." "I know you're not," Clara said. "Say it anyway." "I think I am falling in love with you," Caleb Dawson said. The words were plain and direct and cost him visibly the way anything true costs a man who has kept things inside for too long. Clara held her breath for just a moment. Then she said, "I think I am too." He looked at her. She looked back. "Well," he said after a moment. "Well," she agreed. They stood on the road outside the school in the long afternoon light, neither of them moving, and Clara thought that this was not the ending of something, or even clearly the beginning of something. It was the moment between held breath and taken breath, the suspended instant before everything resumes at a different altitude. Then the 10-year-old with red hair reappeared from around the corner of the school fence, apparently having forgotten something, and stopped when he saw them. He looked at Clara. He looked at Caleb. He pointed at Caleb. "I told you," he said to no one in particular, and walked away again. But the thing about open doors is that the wind comes through them. Clara walked home that evening, different, lighter. In a way she didn't fully trust, yet the way you don't fully trust good news when you've been careful for a long time. She had said the true thing. He had said the true thing. Those two true things were now in the world together, which meant something different was beginning. She thought about what different looked like practically. She thought about what Pine Hollow would say. She thought about Eleanor's letter, which she had not read. Caleb had described it, had told her what it contained, but she had not asked to see it, and he had not offered, and she thought that was exactly right. That letter was between Caleb and Eleanor. Clara did not need to hold it. She believed him. That was enough. What she had not thought through was Margaret Alcott. Margaret was Ruth Alcott's older sister, a widow herself, who had been close friends with Eleanor Dawson from girlhood. She was not a gossip, and she was not a small-spirited woman. But she was fiercely loyal, and she had been watching Clara's visits to the Dawson ranch with an attention that Clara had not fully understood until the following morning. She came to the schoolhouse before classes started. She sat down in a student chair with the deliberateness of someone who has decided to have a hard conversation and has promised herself she won't flinch. "I heard Caleb came to see you yesterday," she said. "He did," Clara said. "I've known Caleb Dawson for 15 years, Margaret said. "I was at his wedding. I sat with Eleanor when she was sick. I was in that house the day she died." She paused. "I am not coming here to attack you. I want you to know that before I say what I'm going to say." "Say it," Clara said. Eleanor Dawson was the most alive person I ever knew, Margaret said. She was the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. And when she died, she took something out of this world that cannot be replaced. Her voice was steady, but tight the way voices get when someone is holding something very hard. What you're doing with Caleb, I've watched it. I've watched him come back, and I can see what you are to him. I'm not blind. But, Clara said, but I need to know, Margaret said, that you understand what you are walking into. Because this is not a simple story, Clara. That man loved Eleanor Dawson in a way that most people never love anyone. And if you go the distance with him, you will live with that. You will live in a house where she lived. You will garden in a garden she planned. You will be loved by a man who learned how to love by loving someone else first. She leaned forward. I need to know you can hold that. Not just now, when it seems bearable, but in 10 years, in 20. Clara held Margaret's gaze and did not rush the answer, because it was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. Margaret, she said finally, I am not looking to replace Eleanor. I am not competing with her. I never have been. She paused. What Caleb gave Eleanor is hers. It always will be. What he might give me if we get there will be different, not lesser. Different. She looked steadily at the older woman. I can hold that. I intend to. Margaret studied her for a long time. Then she said quietly, Eleanor wrote a letter. Before she died. She gave it to me, and said if there was ever a woman who seemed right for Caleb, I should tell her what was in it. Clara went very still. She didn't give it to him, Clara asked. She said he'd argue with it in person. She didn't want to spend her last good days arguing with him. A ghost of a smile. That's Eleanor. Clara's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. She said, Margaret continued carefully, that whoever the woman was, if there was one, she should know one thing. She said Caleb loves slowly, and he loves completely, and he loves forever. Make sure she knows what she's signing up for. The room was very quiet. I know, Clara said. Her voice was not quite steady. Margaret looked at her for another long moment. Then she nodded once. Good, she said. She stood up, straightened her coat, and walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned back. He found the letter, she said. Not a question. Yes, Clara said. Margaret nodded again. Something in her face released not entirely, but enough. Then it's time, she said simply, and she walked out. Clara sat for a long time after Margaret left. She was still sitting when her first student arrived. Young Billy Marsh, chronically early, who took one look at her and said, with the devastating perceptiveness of an 8-year-old, Are you crying, Miss Bennett? No, Clara said, which was technically true. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. There was a distinction. Your face looks like my mama's face when she's happy about something sad, Billy said helpfully, and went to his seat. Clara gathered herself. She stood at the front of her classroom and looked at the 12 faces settling into their chairs, and she thought about what Margaret Alcott had said. Caleb loves slowly, and he loves completely, and he loves forever. She thought about the railing he'd fixed. She thought about the larkspur he'd planted. She thought about the sweet pea along the fence line, the thing he'd added that was his own, not Eleanor's something new, in a place that had only had old things for 3 years. She thought about a 10-year-old with red hair saying you can tell when a person is not talking about someone on purpose. She picked up her chalk. Fractions, she said. Page 14, let's get started. But underneath the mathematics, underneath the routine of the school day, something was running that had no off switch. She was going back on Sunday. And whatever came next, she was ready for it. What came next, as it turned out, was Thomas Grady. Not at the ranch this time. He came to the schoolhouse on a Friday afternoon, after the children had gone, with the manner of a man making a social call and the precision of a man executing a strategy. He sat in the parents' chair across from Clara's desk and rested his hat on his knee and smiled the smile she'd heard described, but never encountered directly. Miss Bennet, he said. I'll be brief. I'm a direct man. Be direct then, Clara said. You've been spending time at the Dawson Ranch, he said. I have a business interest in that property, and I want to be honest with you about something. Caleb Dawson is not a man in a position to give you a stable future. He is emotionally compromised, financially precarious after years of undermanaging his spread, and in no condition to make sound decisions about land or love. He paused. I am not saying this to be cruel. I am saying it because someone should. Clara looked at him. Are you finished? She said. Grady blinked. He had not expected that as a response. Because I want to make sure I understand what you're doing, Clara said, and her voice was entirely calm, which was somehow more pointed than if she'd raised it. You are trying to use me to get to Caleb. You think if you plant doubt in my mind, I'll withdraw and he'll be weakened and your offer on the ranch becomes more attractive. She tilted her head slightly. Is that about right? Grady's expression shifted. You're a smart woman, he said. The smile had changed quality. Caleb Dawson is one of the most capable men in this county, Clara said. His ranch is well run. His cattle are healthy, and the only thing precarious about his position is that you want his land and he won't sell it to you. Those are different things. She stood up, which ended the sitting across the desk dynamic cleanly. I'd like you to leave Mr. Grady. He stood, put his hat on, looked at her with the measuring look of a man adjusting a plan. I hope you know what you're getting into, he said, not kindly. I know exactly what I'm getting into, Clara said. He left. Clara stood in the empty schoolroom for a moment after the door closed. Her hands, she noticed, were steady. She was not scared. She was, in fact, something she hadn't expected. She was angry. Clean, purposeful, very specific anger, the kind that is less an emotion than a direction. She picked up her coat. She had something to tell Caleb, and this time she wasn't going to wait until Sunday. Clara rode out to the Dawson Ranch on a Friday afternoon for the first time in 4 months of Sundays. She had borrowed Martha Greer's horse, a reliable brown mare named Patience, which Clara thought was either appropriate or ironic, depending on how the evening went, and she pushed the mare at a pace that matched the feeling in her chest, which was not quite urgency and not quite anger, but somewhere between them, running hot and clean and purposeful. Caleb was splitting wood in the yard when she came through the gate. He heard the horse and turned, and the look on his face when he registered that it was Clara on a Friday on a horse at 4 p.m. was the look of a man who immediately understood that something had happened and was already setting down his axe. What's wrong? He said. Thomas Grady came to my schoolhouse today, Clara said, dismounting. Caleb went very still. He sat in my classroom, Clara continued, and told me you were emotionally compromised and financially precarious, and that I should reconsider my involvement with you, for my own good. She looked at him directly. He was trying to use me to get to you. I want you to know that, and I want you to know it didn't work, and I want you to know I told him to leave. Caleb's jaw had tightened progressively through that speech. By the end of it, the muscle in his cheek was working in a way that Clara had not seen before, contained fury, the kind a disciplined man keeps in a very small room. He went to you, Caleb said. Not a question. Processing. He thought I was the soft target, Clara said. He thought if he put doubt in my mind, the rest would follow. Did he put doubt in your mind? No, she said. He made me angry. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then, something shifted in his face. The fury was still there, but alongside it something warmer. The expression of a man recognizing something about the woman in front of him that he had suspected but not yet seen, confirmed in quite this way. You rode out here on a Friday, he said. I did. Because you were angry. Because you needed to know, Clara said. And because I wasn't going to sit on it until Sunday, like everything was ordinary. He nodded slowly. Come inside, he said. At the kitchen table over coffee, neither of them was particularly drinking. Caleb laid out what he knew about Thomas Grady's methods, which was more than Clara had expected. It turned out the Dawson Ranch was not the only property Grady had been pursuing. Over the past 3 years, he'd acquired 4 neighboring spreads, 2 from men who'd had bad harvests and needed cash, 1 from a widow who hadn't known the land's real value, 1 through a boundary dispute that most people in the county felt had been settled unfairly but couldn't prove. "He's been building toward something," Caleb said. "I don't know exactly what yet, but the land he's acquiring mine would connect his northern and eastern holdings. Without it, he's got 2 separate pieces. With it, he controls the whole river corridor." "The creek," Clara said. "Year-round water," Caleb said. "In this country, that's not land. That's power." Clara turned her cup on the table, thinking. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No. What are you going to do?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Not the uncertain kind of quiet, the kind that meant he was thinking through something he'd already partially decided. "I'm going to talk to Will Sutherland," he said. "He's a land attorney in Cheyenne. Good man. If Grady's methods on those other properties were as sharp as I think they were, there's a record of it somewhere. Land transactions, boundary claims. There's paperwork, and paperwork tells the truth even when people don't." Clara looked at him. "You've been thinking about this for a while," she said. "Since his first visit," Caleb said. "I was just waiting to see how far he'd push before I had to push back." "Coming to my schoolhouse is how far," Clara said. "Yes," Caleb said flatly. "It is." The clarity in his voice was something Clara had not heard quite in that register before. Not anger, not defensiveness, just the complete quiet certainty of a man who has identified a line and watched someone cross it. "I'll write to Sutherland tonight," he said. "Good," Clara said. They looked at each other across the table. "I'm glad you came today," he said. "So am I," she said. And that was the end of Thomas Grady as the subject of conversation, because they had said what needed saying, and both of them understood without discussing it, that there were more important things to talk about than a man who wanted something he wasn't going to get. What followed was the easiest 2 hours Clara could remember in recent history. Not easy, because nothing was happening, because everything was happening. But at last, without the weight of things unsaid, pressing down on every sentence. He had said he was falling in love with her. She had said the same. Those things were in the world now, acknowledged and real, and what they created in their aftermath was not pressure, but relief. The peculiar lightness of 2 people who have stopped pretending. They talked about the ranch. He told her about his plans for the South Field. He was going to run cattle through it this fall, let them work the soil plant, a cover crop in spring. He had a plan that was specific and detailed, the plan of a man who was thinking forward rather than just managing the present, and Clara listened to it with the satisfaction of someone who understood what that planning meant. 6 months ago there had been no forward planning. There had been only maintenance and endurance. She told him about her sister's letter from Ohio. Her sister had asked if she was ever coming east, and Clara had sat with that question for a week before realizing the answer was no, she was not. She had put roots down in Pine Hollow without meaning to, and they were real roots, and she was not interested in pulling them up. "What made you decide that?" Caleb asked. Clara considered. "The school," she said, "and—" she paused. "This road. I've walked this road so many Sunday evenings that I think I'd miss it if I left." He was quiet for a moment. "Just the road?" he asked. She looked at him. "No," she said. "Not just the road." He nodded, and then carefully he reached across the table and put his hand over hers. It was a simple thing. His hand was large and calloused from 30 years of ranch work, and it covered hers completely, and he didn't squeeze or grip, he just placed it there, present and warm and deliberate. Clara looked down at their hands on the table. Then she turned her hand over beneath his, so their palms were together. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The letter to Will Sutherland went out the following Monday. Sutherland's reply came back in 10 days, which was fast for Cheyenne, and what it said was both encouraging and alarming in equal measure. Sutherland confirmed that he had in his professional capacity become aware of certain irregularities in 3 of the 4 recent Grady land acquisitions. Specifically, 2 involved boundary surveys that appeared to have been conducted by a surveyor who had since become exclusively employed by Grady's operation, which was not illegal on its face, but was the kind of arrangement that produced surveys with interesting results. The third involved a promissory note on a widow's property that had terms not consistent with standard practice in the territory. None of it was enough on its own. But together, Sutherland wrote it told the shape of a pattern. He was coming to Pine Hollow. He wanted to see Caleb's original land deed the boundary survey from when the ranch was established and any documentation of Grady's communications. Caleb read the letter twice, then handed it to Clara. She read it at the kitchen table while he stood by the window. "He's building a case," she said. "He's building the beginning of a case," Caleb said. "There's a difference. But he thinks there's something there. He thinks it's worth coming to look, which from Sutherland is as close to enthusiasm as you'll get." Clara set the letter down. "How long has this been happening, the boundary irregularities on those other properties?" 5-6 years, Caleb said. "And no one put it together. Nobody was looking," Caleb said. "Everyone dealt with their own problem separately. That's what he counts on." Clara looked at him. "You're going to put it together." "We're going to put it together," he said. The "we" landed between them simply and naturally, without either of them marking it, just slipping into place the way the right word slips into a sentence you've been trying to finish. Clara picked up the letter again. "Then we'd better find every piece of paper in that back room," she said. Keg. They spent 3 evenings that week going through the contents of the backroom shelf. This was, Clara understood, not a small thing. The back room was where Caleb's life with Eleanor was stored. Not as a museum, not organized for looking at, but the way real things accumulate when 2 people build something together. Letters, receipts, the ranch's original land grant from the territorial office, Eleanor's handwriting on inventory lists and household accounts going back to their first year. A small journal that Caleb touched briefly and set aside without opening, and Clara did not ask about. He moved through it with her steadily. Not without cost. She could see it costing him the particular way his hands slowed over certain things, the way he'd pause and then resume with the deliberate momentum of a man who has made a decision to continue and is making it again every few minutes. But he didn't stop. He went through everything methodically, finding what Sutherland needed, and when Clara reached for a stack of receipts to sort through, he let her without comment. This, too, was a thing she understood without naming. Letting her help in this room with these things, it meant something. On the second evening, he found the original boundary survey. It was crisp, professionally done, precise, the work of a surveyor named Elias Cope, who had certified the property lines when Caleb and Eleanor first took title to the ranch. The lines were clear, the markers described in exact language. Caleb spread it on the table and set his hand flat on it, looking at it. "Grady's man did a survey 3 years ago," he said. "Claimed the eastern boundary was 40 feet off." Clara looked up. 40 feet. That would put the creek access in question. "That's what it would do," Caleb said. "Did you dispute it?" "I told him his survey was wrong and I wasn't selling. That was as far as it got." He tapped Elias Cope's signature at the bottom of the original document. "Cope is still alive. He's in Laramie. 70 years old, and sharp as a tack. I ran into him 2 years ago." Clara felt something click into place. "Sutherland needs to talk to him," she said. "Sutherland needs to talk to him," Caleb agreed. They looked at each other across the table with the specific satisfaction of 2 people who have found the piece that changes the shape of the puzzle. Will Sutherland arrived on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of October. He was a lean, spare man of about 50 with a methodical intelligence that expressed itself in the way he listened completely without interrupting, without visibly reacting, absorbing everything before responding to any of it. Caleb had worked with him on a water rights matter years earlier and trusted him precisely because he didn't promise things. He sat at Caleb's kitchen table, read every document they'd assembled, and said nothing for 12 minutes. Clara had counted. She was not generally a counter, But 12 minutes of a lawyer reading in silence had felt like considerably longer. Finally, he set the papers down. "Tell me about the widow," he said to Caleb. "The one who sold the northern section. Do you know her?" "Agnes Park. She moved to Denver afterward. I knew her husband." Was there any discussion at the time between neighbors about whether the sale was appropriate, whether she understood what she was signing? Caleb was quiet for a moment. There was talk. Margaret Alcott said Agnes had told her she didn't understand all the terms, that some of it had been explained in a way that— he paused, that she later felt was not fully accurate. Sutherland wrote something. "I need to speak with Mrs. Park, and with Elias Cope." He looked at Caleb. "And I need the name of the man who filed Grady's survey against your eastern boundary. If I can establish a pattern of the same surveyor producing results that favor Grady's acquisitions across multiple properties, that becomes a different conversation entirely." "Reuben Cross," Caleb said. "He's been on Grady's payroll for 2 years, lives on Grady's property now." Sutherland wrote that down too. "Caleb," he said, "this is going to take time. I want you to understand that. Even if everything I think is here, a territorial land commission proceeding is not a fast matter. We're talking months, possibly longer." "I'm not going anywhere," Caleb said. Sutherland nodded. He looked at Clara, who had been present through the entire conversation at Caleb's explicit invitation, which Sutherland had registered without comment, with the discretion of a man who understood what it meant when a man wanted a particular woman in the room when important things were discussed. "Miss Bennett," he said, "Caleb tells me Grady approached you directly." "He came to my schoolhouse," Clara said. "Suggested I reconsider my relationship with Caleb on the grounds that Caleb was emotionally and financially compromised." Sutherland's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He named specific financial concerns. He said the ranch was financially precarious, his word. "Did he offer specifics?" "He implied rather than specified," Clara said, "as though he had information." "He may believe he does," Sutherland said, "or he may have been fishing. Either way." He made another note. "His visit to you is not irrelevant. It indicates he's feeling time pressure. Something is moving on his end." "Why would he feel time pressure?" Caleb asked. "Because he's not the only one acquiring land in this corridor," Sutherland said. "There's a railroad survey going through the territory. Nothing public yet, but the route they're considering goes right through this area. If it materializes, land values along the corridor triple, possibly more. Grady is building toward a sale, which means he has a timeline." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. "He needs your land before the railroad survey goes public," Clara said. "That would be my read," Sutherland said. Caleb leaned back. "Well," he said, "that changes the arithmetic." "It does," Sutherland said. "It means the pressure on him will increase, which means he will increase the pressure on you." He looked at Caleb steadily. "You need to be prepared for that." "I've been prepared for that since he showed up the first time," Caleb said. Tense. After Sutherland left, Caleb and Clara sat on the porch in the cold October air. The season had turned while they weren't paying attention the way it always did in Wyoming one day summer, and then a different quality to the light and the wind, and you understood winter was on its way. They had their coats on. Clara had her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that was going cold. "He's going to come again," Caleb said. "Grady?" "I know. Could be more aggressive than before." "I know that too," Clara said. He looked at her. "You're not worried?" "I'm concerned," she said. "There's a difference. Worried is when you don't know what to do. Concerned is when you know what to do and you're paying attention." He almost smiled. "Sutherland's going to Laramie to find Cope. He's going to Denver to find Agnes Park. That takes weeks." "Yes. A lot can happen in weeks." Clara turned to look at him fully. "Caleb, whatever he tries, we know what he's doing now. We have Sutherland. We have the original survey. We have Cope. And we have each other." She paused. "He came after me because he thought I was the soft place. He was wrong about that." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. He was. Something in that, the completeness of it, the way he said it, settled between them like warmth. They sat with it. The cold air was sharp, and the stars were beginning to show the enormous Wyoming sky, doing what it always did, making everything below it feel simultaneously small and significant. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said. Clara waited. "I went back to the back room last night," he said. "After you left. I opened the little journal, the one I set aside." She didn't respond, just kept her attention steady on him. "It was Eleanor's planting journal," he said. "What she grew each year, where she put things, what worked and what didn't." He paused. There was an entry from the spring before she died. She wrote about the larkspur, said she was going to expand it along the south wall the following year. He was quiet. She didn't get to. "No," Clara said softly. "I'm going to do it for her," he said. "In spring, expand it the way she planned." He turned to look at Clara. "And I'm going to plant sweet pea on the east fence the way I planned. Both things, in the same garden." Clara understood exactly what he was saying. "That's the right thing," she said. "I think so too," he said. He reached over and took her hand the way he had at the kitchen table, simply without ceremony, palm against palm. "I want you to be here in spring," he said. "When they come up." Clara felt something move through her chest that was too large and too complicated to name neatly, so she didn't try. She just held his hand and looked at the sky. "I'll be here," she said. The next pressure came from a direction neither of them had anticipated. It came from inside Pine Hollow, and it came in the form of a school board meeting. The board consisted of 5 men ranchers and businessmen, the kind of solid civic infrastructure that small towns ran on. Clara had worked with them for 4 years without significant conflict. She believed, earned their respect through competent teaching and general good sense. What she had not fully accounted for was that 2 of the 5 board members did business with Thomas Grady. The meeting was called nominally to discuss the fall curriculum. It was the 3rd item on the agenda that was the actual point. "Miss Bennett," said Harold Fitch, who ran the mill and had borrowed working capital from Grady twice. "There's been community concern raised about your—" He paused, choosing his word. "Personal associations. Specifically your frequent visits to the Dawson property, and what some feel is an inappropriate relationship with a recently bereaved member of this community." Clara looked at him across the meeting table. "Eleanor Dawson died 3 years ago," she said. "By most measures, that's not recent. Some feel the period of mourning is a matter of—" "Harold," she said, "I'd like you to say plainly what you're asking me." Fitch shifted in his chair. "The board feels that a school teacher's conduct reflects on the institution. We'd like your assurance that your personal life is being conducted in a manner appropriate to your position." "Are you asking me to stop seeing Caleb Dawson?" A pause. "We're asking you to exercise discretion," said the second Grady associate, a man named Bauer. "I have exercised nothing but discretion," Clara said. "I have visited a neighbor who needed company. I have done so in the full sight of the community on Sunday evenings without any conduct that could be called inappropriate by any reasonable standard." She looked around the table. "If the board has a specific complaint about my teaching, I'm here to answer it. If this is about my private life, I'd like to remind you that my contract addresses my conduct as a teacher, not my Sundays." Fitch opened his mouth. "And I would also like to note," Clara said, and her voice had taken on the specific quality it took when she was about to say something that was going to land, "that 2 members of this board have financial relationships with Thomas Grady. The same Thomas Grady who came to my schoolhouse to suggest I distance myself from Caleb Dawson because he wants to acquire Caleb's land. I would think carefully, Harold, about whose interests are being served by this conversation." The silence that followed was the kind that has a texture. Fitch said nothing. Bauer said nothing. The other 3 board members, all of whom Clara knew had no stake in Grady's business, were looking at Fitch and Bauer, with expressions ranging from discomfort to something sharper. James Alderman, the board chairman, and a man Clara had always respected, cleared his throat. "I don't believe the board has any formal concerns about Miss Bennett's teaching or her professional conduct," he said with the measured authority of a man exercising his role precisely. "I'd suggest we move back to the curriculum discussion." Fitch nodded. Bauer nodded. The agenda moved on. But when the meeting ended and Clara walked out into the night air, her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the full impact of what she'd just understood. Grady wasn't just coming for the ranch. He was willing to come for her livelihood. He was willing to apply pressure through every available channel until Caleb was isolated, weakened, and ready to sell. She stood outside the meeting hall and breathed the cold night air until her hands were steady. Then she walked to the telegraph office, which was still open. She sent a telegram to Sutherland in Cheyenne. It said Grady applying pressure through school board. Believe timeline accelerating. How soon can you move? The reply came back in the morning. It said, found Cope, found Park, moving faster than expected. Hold. Done. She brought the telegram to Caleb the next Sunday. He read it standing at the kitchen counter. Read it twice. He found them, he said. Both of them, Clara said. He set the telegram down. He looked at her. The school board, he said. It wasn't a question he'd heard about the meeting from 3 different people by Friday. I handled it, Clara said. I know you did, he said. That's not... He paused. Clara, this is landing on you in ways I didn't. Caleb, I didn't expect him to go after your position. He didn't succeed, she said. But he tried, and he'll try again. He'll find other ways to... Caleb. Her voice was firm, warm, but firm. The voice she used in the classroom when a child was spiraling into a worry they needed to be pulled back from. Look at me. He looked. I am not fragile, she said. I am not going to crack under Thomas Grady's pressure. I came into this with my eyes open, and I am standing in it with my eyes open. She moved to him, crossed the kitchen, which was not a large kitchen, 4 steps at most, and stood directly in front of him. You do not need to protect me from the consequences of a choice I made clearly. What you need to do is trust that I meant it when I said I wasn't going anywhere. He looked down at her. The height difference between them was significant. She came to his shoulder, but there was nothing small about the way she held herself in front of him. Clara Bennett took up exactly the space she was entitled to, no more and no less, and had been doing so her entire life. I trust you, he said. The words were simple and complete. Good, she said. And then, because the moment was exactly what it was, and neither of them was pretending otherwise anymore, he put his arms around her, not dramatically, not urgently, just held her. The way you hold something real, the way you hold something you have decided with your full self to keep. She leaned into it. They stood like that in the kitchen for a long moment, and outside the window, the cold October morning was doing what October did, and the larkspur on the south wall had gone dormant for the season seeds, sleeping in the dark soil, waiting for spring. Waiting just like everything else worth waiting for. Chug. 3 days later, Grady made his move. Not on Caleb, on the water. He filed a claim with the Territorial Land Office, asserting that a half-mile section of the creek that ran through the east edge of the Dawson property crossed a boundary that had been incorrectly surveyed, using as his evidence Reuben Cross's survey from 3 years prior, and that this section of creek therefore fed onto land that properly fell within his eastern holding. If the claim stood, Caleb's cattle would lose the creek access that kept them through dry summers. Without the creek access, the ranch was not viable. Caleb received the notice on a Thursday morning and read it at the kitchen table with the stillness of a man who has been expecting a blow and feels it land exactly where he predicted. He sent a telegram to Sutherland. Sutherland sent one back within the hour. It said expected this. Cope is ready. Park is ready. Filing response. Monday. Do not engage Grady directly. Trust the process. Caleb read the telegram. He set it on the table. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up his hat and went to find Eddie Pierce, because he needed to tell someone in person, and there were limits to what a man could process alone in a kitchen, regardless of how long he'd been practicing. Eddie listened to the whole thing on his own porch, chewing the end of an unlit pipe, and when Caleb finished he said, "Cross's survey, huh?" "Yeah." "I always thought that man's eyes were too close together," Eddie said. It was not particularly helpful, but Caleb laughed. And the laugh was real, and it moved through him and left something lighter behind it, and he rode back to the ranch in the cold afternoon, thinking that 2 years ago he would have received that notice alone, and sat in it alone and carried it alone through the long dark of a Wyoming night. That was not tonight. Tonight he had Sutherland moving. He had Cope and Park ready. He had Eddie Pierce and his anatomical theory about dishonest surveyors. And he had Clara. He had Clara, who would walk through his gate on Sunday and read the notice with her full attention and say something that was true and useful and entirely her own. He had reasons to stay. He had said that to her once, and it had been true then. It was truer now. He unsaddled the horse and turned her out and walked to the porch and sat in his chair as the cold evening came down. And he did not sit in the other chair's absence as he had for 3 years. He sat alongside it, waiting the way you wait when waiting has a purpose. Spring, he thought, the larkspur and the sweet pea and everything that was going to come up together. He could wait. Sutherland filed the response on Monday as promised. Caleb knew this because he received a telegram at noon confirming it, and he read it standing at the gate of his own property with the particular feeling of a man who has been absorbing pressure for weeks and has finally put something in motion that moves in the opposite direction. The response challenged Cross's survey on 4 specific grounds, cited the original Cope survey as the controlling document, and formally requested that the Territorial Land Office commission an independent review before any boundary determination was made. It was not a victory, but it was a wall. And Grady, when he received his copy, would know it was a wall built by someone who understood what they were doing. Caleb sent a telegram back to Sutherland received. What next? Sutherland's reply came by evening. Cope travels to Pine Hollow next week to review original markers in person. Park has provided written statement. I am filing a separate complaint with the Territorial Land Commission regarding the pattern of cross surveys across Grady acquisitions. This is now larger than your property. Prepare for noise. Caleb read that last line twice. Prepare for noise. He understood what that meant. Sutherland was not just defending the Dawson Ranch anymore. He was pulling at a thread that ran through 5 properties, 2 boundary disputes, a widow's coerced sale, and a surveyor who had made a profitable habit of finding exactly what his employer needed him to find. When that thread came out, it was going to make a sound. He brought the telegrams to Clara on Sunday. She read them at the kitchen table with the careful attention she brought to everything worth understanding, and when she finished, she set them down and looked at him with an expression that was sober and warm in equal measure. "He's going after all of it," she said. "All of it," Caleb confirmed. "Grady is going to fight hard." "Yes." "Are you ready for that?" Caleb sat down across from her. He thought about the question seriously, which was the only way he knew how to answer it. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been, he said. Not because I couldn't handle the fight, because I didn't have enough reason to care about winning it. He looked at her directly. I have reason now. Clara held his gaze. So do I, she said. Elias Cope arrived on a Wednesday. He was exactly as Caleb had described, 70 years old, sharp-eyed with the unhurried precision of a man who had spent 50 years making measurements that needed to be correct and had never once found the pressure to cut corners compelling. He had a white beard and hands that were slightly gnarled with age, but still entirely steady, and he shook Caleb's hand at the gate and said, "Heard someone's been disputing my work," with the tone of a man who found this more interesting than offensive. Cross filed a survey that puts the eastern boundary 40 feet inside mine, Caleb said. Then Cross is wrong, Cope said simply. I set those markers myself. I know exactly where they are. They walked the eastern boundary together, Cope, Caleb, and Sutherland, who had ridden up from Cheyenne the previous evening. Clara was not there that morning. She had school, but Caleb had told her everything the night before at the porch, sitting in the cold with their coats on, and she had listened to every detail with the focus of someone who understands that details matter. What Cope found at the eastern boundary was exactly what everyone with good sense had expected. The original markers were exactly where he had placed them. Cross's survey had moved the line 40 feet west, which had been accomplished by using a reference point on the wrong side of a creek bend. Not an obvious error. Not the kind of thing a layperson would catch, but entirely obvious to a man who had done the original work and knew precisely which bend of which creek he had used and why. That's not a mistake, Cope said, standing at the original marker, looking at the discrepancy in Cross's documentation. A mistake would be 5 feet, maybe 10. 40 feet in a specific direction that benefits one party is a decision. Sutherland wrote something in his notebook. "Would you be willing to say that," he said, "in front of the Land Commission?" Cope looked at him. "Son, I am 70 years old. I have been setting property lines in this territory since before it was a territory. I have one professional reputation, and I intend to leave this earth with it intact." He put his hat back on. "Yes, I will say that." Caleb stood at his own fence line in the cold October morning and felt something that he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Solid ground. Not metaphor, not feeling. Actual solid ground under his feet, his land, his markers, his creek, confirmed by the man who had measured it, and now by the legal process that was going to put that measurement into the record against the man who had tried to take it from him. He said, "Thank you, Elias," and meant it in more layers than Cope probably realized. Cope nodded. "Buy me a decent lunch in town, and we'll call it even." The Land Commission hearing was scheduled for the second week of November. In the 2 weeks between Cope's visit and the hearing, Pine Hollow lived with the particular charged atmosphere of a small town that knows something significant is happening, but doesn't yet know exactly what. People talked. People speculated. Thomas Grady was seen at the hotel twice, which meant he had brought men with him, which meant he was treating this seriously. Frank Cargill at the feed store announced publicly that he thought the whole thing was being blown out of proportion and that Grady was a business asset to the county. 3 people told Clara what he'd said. She thanked all 3 of them and said she hoped the Land Commission would be able to evaluate the evidence clearly, and left it at that. Hattie Cargill, who had warned Clara months ago about the complexity of walking into Caleb's life, appeared at the schoolhouse on a Thursday afternoon. Clara looked up when she came in and prepared herself for another installment of complicated counsel. Instead, Hattie set a covered dish on the edge of the desk. "Beef stew," she said, "for Caleb, for the week before the hearing. I know he doesn't always remember to eat when things are pressing." Clara looked at the dish. She looked at Hattie. "Thank you," she said. Hattie adjusted her coat with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has made a decision and executed it and does not need extended acknowledgement. "Eleanor was my neighbor for 8 years, she said. She would want him fed." A pause. "She would also want him to not be alone. I should have understood that sooner." Clara was quiet for a moment. "It takes people time," she said gently. "Yes, well." Hattie smoothed her coat again. "The stew has dumplings. He always liked dumplings." She walked out. Clara sat with the dish for a moment, and then she smiled the real unguarded smile and picked it up. She had it on Caleb's table by 4 o'clock. The night before the hearing, Caleb couldn't sleep. This was not anxiety in the ordinary sense. He was not a man who came apart before confrontations. He had faced difficult things his entire life and found that facing them was almost always easier than the anticipation. What kept him awake was something different, more interior, the restless energy of a man who has done everything that can be done and must now wait for something outside himself to resolve. He sat on the porch at 2 in the morning in the cold Wyoming dark, and he thought about the year. He thought about a June evening and a woman at his gate with a basket. He thought about the second chair. He thought about larkspur seeds on a workbench for 11 days. He thought about a letter from Eleanor that had been waiting 3 years for him to be ready to read it. He thought about Clara saying, "I am not going anywhere," and the way his whole body had believed it the moment she said it. He sat with all of that. And when he finally went back inside, he went to his desk and took out a sheet of paper. He did not write what I think I am starting to love her this time. He wrote something different, something he was going to need to say out loud tomorrow, not to the Land Commission but to Clara. After. Whatever happened at the hearing. He read it. He did not burn it. He put it in his inside pocket. The good jacket pocket, the same pocket where he'd carried Eleanor's letter, and he went to bed and slept. The Territorial Land Commission hearing was held in the Pine Hollow Meeting Hall. It was not a dramatic proceeding in the courtroom sense. There were no speeches, no theatrics, no gallery gasping at revelations. It was 3 commissioners, 2 stacks of documents, Sutherland presenting one case, and Grady's attorney presenting the other, and Elias Cope sitting in the back of the room with the patient imperturbability of a man who has been doing this a long time and knows that truth told calmly is more effective than truth told loudly. Caleb sat beside Sutherland. Clara sat 3 rows back with Margaret Alcott on one side and Eddie Pierce on the other. She had not been asked to sit there. They had both simply arrived at the hall and settled next to her. Margaret with a straight back and Eddie with his unlit pipe, and Clara had understood that Pine Hollow in its own unhurried way had been deciding something. Grady sat across the room with his attorney and 2 men Clara didn't recognize well-dressed with the professional neutrality of men who cost money. The lead commissioner, a man named Wallace, who had done this work for 20 years and had the air of someone who had heard every version of every land dispute that existed, opened the proceedings without ceremony. Sutherland presented first. He was efficient and precise. The original Cope survey, the boundary markers confirmed by Cope's personal inspection 2 weeks prior, the specific technical error in Cross's methodology, and Agnes Park's written statement regarding the terms of her sale, which he read aloud in a voice that was deliberately uninflected so that the content could speak for itself. The room was quiet while he read it. Park had written, "I did not understand that I was signing away my water access rights. It was explained to me that I was signing a straightforward deed transfer. Had I understood the full terms, I would not have signed. I had no attorney present. I was advised by Mr. Grady's representative that one was unnecessary." Grady's attorney objected that the Park statement was outside the scope of a boundary dispute regarding the Dawson property. Sutherland said with complete calm that it was relevant to establishing a pattern of conduct by the same party using the same methods. Commissioner Wallace looked at Grady's attorney over his spectacles. "I'll hear it," Wallace said. Grady's attorney sat back. Grady across the room had the expression of a man watching a situation move in a direction he had not planned for, doing the rapid internal arithmetic of someone whose options are narrowing. Caleb watched him doing it. He felt nothing particularly satisfying about it. He had not come here for satisfaction. He had come here for his land, his creek, and the future. He had decided he was going to live on this ranch, and satisfaction was not the same thing as any of those. Cope took the stand, such as it was a chair, at the front of the room and answered Sutherland's questions with the brevity of a man who has never needed to embellish accurate information. "Mr. Cope, did you survey the eastern boundary of the Dawson property?" "I did, 1873. "And in your professional assessment, where does that boundary fall relative to the creek?" 15 feet east of the main channel. Consistently. The boundary I surveyed gives the Dawson property clear access to the creek along the full length of its eastern edge. "And the cross survey, which places the boundary 40 feet west of your markers in your professional assessment, is that discrepancy consistent with surveying error?" Cope looked at him. "No," he said. "What is it consistent with?" "A deliberate adjustment of the reference point to produce a predetermined result." The room moved. Not loudly, a shifting, a change in the quality of the attention in the space. Commissioner Wallace wrote something. The second commissioner leaned to the third and said something quietly. Grady's attorney cross-examined Cope for 20 minutes and got at the end of it approximately nothing. Cope was 70 years old and had been doing this since before some of the people in the room were born, and had the professional equanimity of a man who simply tells the truth and finds the truth fully adequate to any occasion. When it was over, Cope walked back to his seat, settled in, and adjusted his hat. Eddie Pierce leaned to Clara and said very quietly, "I told you, eyes too close together." Clara pressed her lips together to keep from making a sound. Margaret Alcott on her other side sat with her hands folded and her back straight and her eyes forward, and Clara could see from the set of her jaw that Margaret Alcott was feeling something she had been waiting a long time to feel. Something like justice. Yet, the commissioners took 40 minutes to deliberate. Caleb sat with Sutherland in the hallway and drank coffee that tasted like it had been on the stove since morning, and said almost nothing. Sutherland reviewed his notes. Caleb watched the door. Clara appeared in the hallway after 10 minutes with 2 better cups of coffee she had apparently produced from somewhere, and handed one to Caleb and one to Sutherland, and sat down next to Caleb on the bench without saying anything. He looked at her. She looked back. "Whatever happens," she said. "I know," he said. They sat. The 40 minutes passed. Shin. Wallace's ruling was delivered in the flat specific language of official proceedings, but its meaning was entirely clear. The Cross Survey was rejected as the controlling document. The Cope Survey was upheld. The Dawson eastern boundary stood exactly where it had always stood, 15 feet east of the creek channel, with full water access intact. Furthermore, Commissioner Wallace noted for the territorial record that the pattern of surveys conducted by Reuben Cross on behalf of Thomas Grady warranted referral to the Territorial Attorney General's office for further review. He said this in the same uninflected administrative voice that he'd used for everything else, but the room heard it. The referral to the Attorney General was not a small thing. That was not a boundary dispute being resolved. That was a door opening onto something considerably larger. Grady's attorney leaned to Grady and said something in his ear. Grady listened with the contained expression of a man processing information he does not like but is too experienced to show publicly. He straightened. He picked up his hat. He said nothing to anyone in the room. He walked out. His 2 well-dressed associates followed. His attorney gathered his papers with the professional efficiency of a man who has lost cases before and finds the work of losing them identical to the work of winning them. The room exhaled. Not all at once in sections the way a crowd breathes when something held has released. Eddie Pierce said to no one in particular, "Well." Margaret Alcott closed her eyes briefly and then opened them and looked at the front of the room where Wallace was signing documents and said nothing, but the expression on her face was the expression of someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and felt the weight shift. Sutherland shook Caleb's hand. "The Attorney General referral changes the landscape significantly," he said. "The other property owners, the ones Grady bought from, they have standing now to revisit those transactions. This is not over. But today was necessary for everything that comes next." "Will Agnes Park get her land back?" Caleb asked. "I don't know," Sutherland said honestly. "But she has a better chance today than she had yesterday." Caleb nodded. He turned. Clara was standing just behind him. He looked at her and she looked at him, and the full year of it, the basket at the gate, the second chair, the larkspur seeds. Eleanor's letter, the school board, meeting the telegrams, the 2 in the morning on the porch, all of it was in the space between them, present and real, and entirely theirs. "Come on," he said. He put his hand at the small of her back, simple, warm, claiming nothing beyond what was already understood, and they walked out of the meeting hall together. Pine Hollow had a way of absorbing significant events and expressing its absorption through food. By the time Caleb and Clara reached the porch of the general store, Martha Greer had appeared with pie. Eddie Pierce materialized from somewhere with a bottle of something that he described only as appropriate for the occasion. Margaret Alcott stood on the steps of the hall and accepted congratulations on behalf of everyone who had waited for this day, because Margaret Alcott was the kind of woman who could do that without anyone finding it odd. James Alderman, the school board chairman, shook Caleb's hand and then shook Clara's hand and said, "Pine Hollow is well served by both of you," in the voice of a man making a statement that is also an acknowledgement of a previous wrong without spelling any of it out. Clara accepted this with a nod. Caleb accepted it with a quieter version of the same. Frank Cargill was not present. Hattie Cargill was, and she handed Caleb a jar of preserves and said briskly, "For the winter," and patted his arm once and moved on. Caleb stood in the middle of Pine Hollow's impromptu gathering with the slightly stunned expression of a man who had prepared himself for a fight and found on the other side of it something he hadn't fully prepared for. Community. His community. The people who had kept their distance for 3 years, not because they didn't care, but because they hadn't known how to reach him, and who were now in the uncomplicated way of people who feed each other and shake hands and show up reaching. He looked at Clara. She was talking to Margaret Alcott, one hand around a cup of coffee, completely at ease, the ease of a woman who has been doing this her whole life, who moves through the world, making room for people and being made room for in return. She caught him looking. She raised her eyebrows in the small private way they had developed over months of Sundays, the shorthand of two people who have paid enough attention to each other that full sentences are sometimes unnecessary. He tilted his head toward the road. She said something to Margaret, touched her arm, and came to him. They walked out of town together in the late afternoon light back toward the ranch. They walked without hurrying. The road east was familiar to both of them by now. Clara had walked it so many times in so many weathers that it belonged to her the way roads belong to people who use them seriously. Every turn in it, every place where the ground was uneven, every point where you could first see the Dawson Ranch coming into view around the bend. "You're quiet," Clara said, not as a complaint, just naming it. "Thinking," he said. "About the ruling. About what comes after the ruling." He glanced at her. "Sutherland is right. It's not over. Grady is going to regroup. The Attorney General investigation is going to take time. There may be more pressure before it's finished." "Yes," she said. "I want you to know that going in," he said, "not just today. What today started. It's going to be a longer road than a hearing. Caleb." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "I know what I'm in," she said. "I am not operating on optimistic assumptions. I know Grady is going to come back around in some form. I know the investigation is slow. I know the ranch is a lot of work and Wyoming winters are hard and you are—" She paused. A slight smile. "You are not always easy." "No," he agreed. "None of that changes anything," she said. "I need you to hear me when I say that. Not just today. Going forward. Stop preparing me for difficulty as though I haven't already chosen it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his inside jacket pocket. He took out the folded paper from the night before. He held it for a moment without giving it to her. "I wrote something last night," he said, "when I couldn't sleep. I was going to say it instead of giving it to you, but—" He stopped. "I'm better on paper. You know that." She looked at the paper in his hand. "Can I read it?" she asked. "That's why I brought it," he said. She took it, unfolded it. She read it. It was not long. Caleb Dawson had never been a man for long speeches, even written ones. It said, "Clara, I have been trying to find the right way to say this for 3 months, and I have decided there is no right way, only the true way. So here it is. I love you. Not because you filled an empty chair, not because you came when I was low and stayed when I was difficult, but because you are the most real person I have ever sat a porch with, and being real next to you has made me more real, and I did not know I needed that until you showed me I had lost it." Eleanor gave me the first chapter. You are the next one. I do not say that to compare. I say it because a life has more than one chapter, and I want the rest of mine to be with you. If you'll have me. Clara read it twice. Then she folded it. She kept it. "Yes," she said. "Just that. One word, clear and complete, and requiring nothing added to it." Caleb exhaled one long, quiet breath, the breath of a man putting down the last piece of a weight he'd been carrying. "Yes," he repeated. "Yes," she confirmed. He looked at her. She looked back, and then they were walking again toward the ranch, toward the porch, toward the two chairs that had been waiting all year for exactly this. The first snow came 3 days later. Wyoming's way of marking transitions, the season changing with the blunt efficiency of country that does not negotiate with weather, that simply presents it and expects accommodation. Caleb woke to the white silence of the first snow and lay in bed for a moment, taking stock of what the day contained. Then he got up, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the ranch wearing its winter coat. The larkspur was dormant under the snow on the south wall. The sweet pea seeds along the east fence were sleeping in the cold ground. Both waiting. He had work to do. The cattle needed checking. The barn needed the cold weather preparation that was already a week overdue, because the past weeks had consumed everything, and Sutherland had written to say the Attorney General's office had formally opened an investigation into the cross surveys, which meant more documentation to gather, more correspondence to manage. He did not feel overwhelmed by any of it. He felt for the first time in 3 years like a man who has a full life, rather than a man who is managing an empty one. He wrote 2 letters that morning, one to Sutherland, with the additional documentation requested, one to Clara, which was short and said simply, "First snow. Ranch looks like Eleanor would have liked it. Come Sunday. I'll have dinner ready for a change." He sent both. Sunday came. Clara appeared at the gate in the early afternoon, a little earlier than usual, wearing her winter coat and carrying nothing because he had told her not to bring anything. He met her at the gate. He had done this since August. He would probably do it for the rest of his life, and not think of it as remarkable, but Clara still felt it each time, the small, deliberate fact of him coming to meet her, which meant she was not a visitor, had not been a visitor for some time. "You actually cooked," she said when she came inside and registered the evidence. "I told you I would." "I believed you in principle," she said. Implementation was less certain. "There's a roast," he said, "and I attempted biscuits." "How did they turn out?" "Edible. Margaret Alcott would have opinions." "Margaret Alcott has opinions about everything," Clara said, taking off her coat. "That's what makes her Margaret Alcott." They ate at the kitchen table, both chairs facing each other as they always did now, and the meal was imperfect in the way of things made by someone who is competent but out of practice, and entirely good in the way of things made with intention. Caleb told her about the Attorney General's letter. She told him about a new student who had arrived that week, a girl of 9 who'd moved from Kansas with her family and was terrifyingly smart and already bored by the 4th grade reader. "Give her the 6th grade reader," Caleb said. "That's what I did," Clara said. "On day 2. She'll be fine then." "She'll run the school board in 20 years, Clara said. "I'm going to write her a letter to be opened in 2 decades congratulating her." He smiled. Not the almost smile, the real one, full and unguarded, the one that had been appearing with increasing frequency in recent months, and that Clara had privately decided was one of the best things she had ever been in the same room with. "What?" he said, catching her looking. "Nothing," she said. "Eat your biscuit." "You're looking at me." "I often look at you," she said reasonably. "You're there." He shook his head, but the smile stayed. After dinner they went to the porch. The cold was serious now, the kind of cold that meant business, that made the air sharp and clear, and gave everything at distance a crystalline precision. They had their coats and their coffee, and the wool blanket that had appeared on the porch railing sometime in October, without either of them noting exactly when. The larkspur was invisible under the snow. The sweet pea fence was just a fence right now, bare and waiting. But they were there, both of them, sleeping. "Margaret told me something last week," Clara said. "What did she say?" "She said Eleanor used to sit out here on the first snow of the year. Said she liked to watch it settle." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "She did," he said. "Every year. She'd come out with her coffee and just sit." "I know," Clara said. "Margaret told me." He turned to look at her. "She told you so you could tell me?" he asked. "She told me so I'd understand why it matters," Clara said. "So when we're sitting here on the first snow, I know what we're doing. Not pretending she wasn't here, not replacing anything." She paused. "Just being here, too." Caleb looked at the snow-covered yard for a long moment. "She would have liked you," he said. "You've said that before. Because it's true." He looked at her. She liked people who didn't perform, who just were what they were and said what they meant. He paused. "She would have told you within 20 minutes exactly what she thought about everything, and then she would have asked you what you thought about everything, and by the end of it, you would have felt like you'd known her your whole life." Clara felt the warmth and ache of that together. The way she had learned to hold things about Eleanor as gift rather than burden, as presence rather than shadow. "I wish I had," she said honestly. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." They sat with that. Not sadly, just honestly. The way you sit with true things. Then Caleb reached into his jacket pocket. Clara watched him. He took out a small box plainwood, the kind a man makes himself on a winter evening when he has decided something and has no patience for the jewelry shop in town. He held it for a moment. "I'm not good at ceremonies," he said. "I know that. And I've already written the long version on paper, so, Caleb." He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple, a thin band of gold with a small setting, nothing elaborate. The kind of ring that a man chooses when he wants something that will last 50 years and look right at the end of them. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because the ranch needs someone in it. Not because I'm lonely. Because you are the person I want to build the next chapter with, and I don't want to keep talking around that as though it isn't exactly what this is." Clara looked at the ring in the box. She looked at him. "Your timing," she said, "is the first snow of the year on a porch in Wyoming where I cannot feel my left foot." Is that a no? "It's a yes," she said. "I'm just noting the conditions." He took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger, which was, as she had noted, very cold, and he held her hand in both of his. For a moment, warming it, or just holding it, or both. It was difficult to say where one ended and the other began. Clara looked at the ring on her hand. Then she looked up at him. "In spring," she said, "when the larkspur comes up." "And the sweet pea," he said. "And the sweet pea," she agreed. "We do it then." "In the garden," he said. "In the garden," she confirmed. He nodded. They turned back to the yard, the snow settling, the quiet, enormous, and complete. The cold air carrying the particular clarity of Wyoming in November, when the world goes spare and honest, and every unnecessary thing falls away. Spring came the way it always does in Wyoming. Not gently, not all at once, but in the honest and slightly chaotic fashion of a season that has to fight for its ground. March brought mud, April brought wind. And then one morning in the first week of May, Caleb walked out to the south wall and the larkspur was up. Not shoots this time. Growth. Real growth. The second-year plants coming in strong and dark green, the ones Eleanor had tended for years, alongside the new plants from the seeds Clara had brought. And somewhere in that growth, it was no longer possible to tell which was which. They had simply become the garden plural, and layered, and entirely alive. He stood looking at it for a long time. Then he went inside and sent a note to Clara at the schoolhouse. It said, "They came up, both of them. Come see." She came that afternoon. She stood next to him in front of the south wall and looked at the garden, and did not say anything immediately, because some things want a moment before words. She would have been pleased, Clara said finally. She would have said they need more water, Caleb said. She would have been right. Probably. They stood there. The east fence had sweet pea starting to climb at thin green tendrils, finding the wood, beginning the slow, patient work of going upward. A different plant. A different hand that had put it there. The same fence, the same land, the same sky overhead. The wedding was in 10 days. Margaret Alcott had organized more than either of them had asked her to, which they had both anticipated and accepted because Margaret Alcott's organizing was an expression of love, and it would have been unkind to refuse it. Hattie Cargill had offered her parlor. James Alderman had offered his garden, which was larger. Clara had said the Dawson Ranch, and Caleb had said yes before she finished the sentence. Here, where the larkspur and the sweet pea were learning to grow together. There was nowhere else. On the morning of this wedding, Caleb stood in the back room of his house. He was dressed the good jacket, the one with the inside pocket, and he had 30 minutes before people arrived, and he was using those 30 minutes the way he had learned to use quiet time. He took Eleanor's letter from the shelf where he kept it now beside her blue ceramic mug in the place that was hers. He did not read it. He knew it by heart. "Don't you dare be alone for 3 years being stubborn about this." He put it back. "I was exactly 3 years," he said to the room, to the letter to Eleanor, who had known him completely, and had therefore known this precisely. "You knew, didn't you?" The room was quiet, but it was not the empty quiet of the years before. It was a room that held things memory and presence, and the accumulated weight of a life that had been lived here and was going to keep being lived here, layered and true. He put on his hat. He walked out to the garden. Oh, Clara came through the gate, wearing a dress the color of the Wyoming sky, in May, not white, not formal, simply right, the dress of a woman who had decided what the day was and dressed accordingly. She carried nothing. She walked with the particular directness she had always walked with, and when she came through the gate and saw him standing by the garden, she stopped for just a moment. Just a breath. The way you stop when something is exactly what you needed, and you want to make sure you register it before you move into it. Then she walked to him. The people of Pine Hollow assembled around the garden. Margaret Alcott, Eddie Pierce, Hattie and Frank Cargill, James Alderman and his wife, a dozen others who had come because this was their community, and this mattered, and that was sufficient reason. The red-haired boy from the school was there with his parents, standing in the back with his arms crossed, and the expression of someone whose theory has been confirmed. Reverend Pierce stood at the front between the larkspur and the sweet pea. Caleb stood facing Clara. Clara stood facing Caleb. They said the words that needed saying plainly without theater in the voices of people who mean exactly what they are saying and need nothing added to it. When it was done, Caleb held Clara's hands in his, the ring already on her finger, from November. The November cold replaced now by May warmth, the snow replaced by larkspur coming into color. He looked at her. She looked back. "We're building something," he said quietly, just for her. "Yes," she said. "Together." "Yes," she said again. "We are." Why? That evening, after everyone had gone, they sat on the porch together in the long May light. 2 chairs, no space between them. The garden was green and growing. The ranch was alive. The legal proceedings in Cheyenne were working their slow course toward a justice that was coming, even if it took time, because true things Caleb had learned arrive eventually, and the work is simply to still be standing when they do. He had been standing. He was still standing. And beside him, with her hand in his, and her whole uncompromising self entirely at ease in the chair that had once held only air, was the woman who had knocked on his door with a basket of stew and changed the shape of everything that came after. The larkspur bloomed. The sweet pea climbed. And on the Dawson Ranch in Wyoming Territory, in the summer of 1882, 2 people who had learned the difference between ending and beginning sat together on a porch and watched their life grow. It was not a small thing. It was in fact everything.